Hi, it's middle-aged beginner here, just looking to share 5 or 6 little learnings I've had from the very first times I've shot a bow. So I've just brought myself a 68-inch rocket from Black Sheep from Apex Hunting, and from a few days of shooting maybe 50 or 60 arrows, putting the thing together. These are some of the things I've learnt. So the very first thing, I guess, is just to use a bow stringer. There are ways to string a bow, wrapping the thing around your leg and things like that, but that's the safest way to do it, I've found, and it's very easy. So essentially you attach one end to the top of the bow, the other end slips around the other way, and then you sort of use your foot to pull the bow. So look, there's simple instructions. I won't show you how to do it in that video, but that just gets the string on safe. So look, the first thing, I guess, safety. Make sure the string's on properly at either end. If you're a beginner, I'd suggest not getting a bow that's too strong for you. Probably the next thing would be arrow length. So if the arrows are too short for you, you could actually pull them right past the arrow rest and potentially into your hand. So that's just something to be aware of. Look, I'd suggest practicing a bit with the bow, making sure you've got you understand your draw length. Add an inch or two to that to your arrows and you should be okay. But look, as a beginner, I find I'm pulling back, my form is all over the place, so I'm pulling back the arrow different lengths probably every time. The next thing for safety would be the arm guard. So I've just got this little Eastern one here. I have shot a few times without it, just not thinking, and probably the second or third shot I took, the string actually hit my forearm, and it does sting a bit. This is only a 26-pound bow, so I'm not straining, and it's probably not hitting me with that great a force, but I imagine if that happened 2 or 3 times, you could end up with quite a sore arm. Now this thing, I'm not exactly sure where to put it on my arm. It didn't come with instructions. I'm not sure if the fat end goes, which end is which. When I find out, I'll let people know. But the main thing I found is if I had it too far forward on my arm, the actual string went sort of behind it and still hit my arm. So you'll figure that out pretty quick where the string's hitting you. Although if your form is changing, it's it's probably going to hit you in different places. The next thing, I guess, is just the arrow rest. Initially I didn't have the actual arrow nock in there. Now these are 2 weird things, like just counterintuitive, I guess, for an absolute noob. I thought if you're right-handed that the arrow would go on the right-hand side, and I guess, having watched a few videos now, that is the case for traditional archery, but for target archery, most people seem to put the arrow on the left, something to do with Archer's paradox, and that was a bit counterintuitive, but look, I've probably shot 50 or 60 arrows, and it soon sort of becomes a little bit normal. The other thing is just this nocking point. That's a do-it-myself job. Because of COVID-19, I haven't been able to go to an archery shop. I've been figuring things out myself. The people at Apex Hunting and Abbey Archery, when I've rung up with questions about equipment, they've been very good. They've just been out of a lot of stock. So yeah, just sort of hunting around for things. This arrow rest that came with the bow from Apex Hunting, I think that'll last about not too long. It's pretty flimsy, but I guess that's the point, so it doesn't interfere with the arrow. These are fairly robust aluminium arrows. Carbon arrows are probably stronger, but look, there's no natural fletchings or anything like that. So that's all been good. So look, applying the nocking thing, I actually used a proper carpenter's square to make sure that was 90 degrees when it was knocked. And these little electrician's pliers were no good, but I managed to squeeze it on using these pliers, so that worked just fine. So yeah, that was, I guess the final thing on safety at this stage would be some sort of finger protection. So this is a Cartel Pro 2. It's the thinnest little piece of leather. I found it strange that I ordered a right-handed one and the rough side is touching the bow, so I don't know if that's the bowstring, and the smooth side was touching my hand. I've just reinforced this and it doesn't hurt at all now, although it's not going to last very long. It really, after 3 or 4 shots, it really stings your fingers when you release the arrow, so that's just something to be aware of. Now, probably the next thing is actually shooting and aiming and things like that. So I set up this little homemade target. It's just a big box surrounded by boxes and some insulation board. It worked out it was about 4 meters off from the point to the target from the point of my arrow when it's in the bow. And being well, my first degree was engineering, so being a bit of an engineer, I've sort of worked out when you line up your eye, looking at the point of the arrow, because just the way you sort of hold it, your eyes, particularly if you're using the Mediterranean draw, which is, you'd have sort of one finger above and 3 below. I figured out, I actually measured that I had about 9 centimeters, my eye was sitting above the bottom of the arrow, and that just means the top of the arrow is just going to go shooting off higher, depending on the distance. And so I just did a few simple calculations, adjusting for gravity, and at 5 meters I figured out roughly, I've got no idea what the actual speed of an arrow is, but I've just used some information from the internet at random. I figured out at 5 meters it might shoot 50 centimeters higher. This is only about 4 meters, so initially I had a mark down here which was 40 centimeters below the actual area I was aiming for. Later on I figured 30 seemed to work better. So look, the first time you shoot, just the power, it's this is only a 26-pound bow, but it was quite a little burst of adrenaline, just whoomp, and quite a few inches into quite dense paper, so that was just quite scary. And also you find when you're getting started, this sort of seems to flop around a bit. I've sort of started, when I lift my bow up, just a little bit angled so that it sits in the rest. So just be aware the arrow will go above where your eye sees the point of the point of the arrow. So it will go high, and I've adjusted for that, and I haven't gone too far off target at the grand old distance of 4 meters. So that's the longest safe area where I can shoot. So aiming is it's very important. I found myself opening one eye and closing the next, and basically I found if I close my left eye, I probably shoot better. There's all sorts of advice online, so just try out what works for you. Also, I found when I actually have all the fingers below, I guess there's a smaller gap with my eye sort of looking down at the point, and that gets, I just don't have to aim so much lower than the actual target. You know, I guess just your form. Every video I've seen on the archery, it's just consistency. So I've got no idea what my form is. I might get my missus to film me at some stage, but I've practiced without a bow. I've practiced with the bow strung. Before the bow arrived, I got the arrows, so I was just using the arrows, just playing around, I guess. So once you've got something like a good form, I guess you want to be consistent. You'll hear a lot about the anchor point. So that's where you draw the arrow back and your hand will rest maybe somewhere solid. The funny thing is, most people sort of on the videos rested against the corner of their mouth. That's not a particularly stable nocking point, but yeah, that's just something I'm still working on. Finally, I'd just mention that this is nice painted black wood, looks beautiful. It's quite, I live in Sydney and it's pretty warm, even though it's autumn, and that gets quite slippery. To make matters worse, I think this grip is just a little bit too small for my hand, so I'm thinking I might put some sort of grip material on it. I've never seen anyone do that, or maybe just wear a glove on the hand that wears that holds the bow, just because it gets a little bit slippery. I'm not sure if that's the finish, or it's just me sort of being a bit hyped up and nervous when I'm shooting, but yeah, that was just something. So yeah, if you don't want to kill yourself, get the right size arrows for your draw length, so you're not going to shoot it through your hand. If you don't want to give yourself permanent nerve damage on your fingers, because even with 26 pounds, it hurts quite a bit to do a 3-finger draw. Maybe there's other releases that are less painful, but doing that 20 or 30 times, you probably stuff up your fingers. And yeah, just I think I'll eventually get a bigger arm guard, because the string can hurt yourself. So look, that's just my initial thoughts. Be careful. It's quite exhilarating, and I find it almost, after a point, a little bit kind of meditative or relaxing. So look, I hope that helps anyone. This is really fresh for me. I've literally just been shooting arrows for a few days, and that's some of the things I've noticed that perhaps the pros, they can probably advise, but it's probably a long time since they've thought about these things. Alright then, hope that helps. This is Middle Aged Beginner signing out.